AI does fundamentally change the role of software engineers and the value that they can provide. Software engineering, if you kind of like peel it back and try to let go of your preconceptions of it, is actually a pretty unique role in that it is partially what I will call a very intellectual or strategic role, thinking through problems. What is the right thing to build? What is the right way to build this so that it is scalable and maintainable and performant? Coupled with a lot of very, I'll call it mechanical work, the fingers on keyboard time where you just bashing code out. High-performing software engineers are good at both of those things. AI is very effective at, right now, creating a lot of efficiency in, and I don't think we are too far from, maybe not entirely eliminating, but substantially changing the day-to-day of engineers that spend the vast majority of their time in that hands-on keyboard time.
Hey everyone, it's Roger with Kinsta. Today I'm joined by a new friend, Phil. Hey Phil, how are you?
Doing wonderful. How are you, Roger?
I'm doing really great. I'm very excited about this call. We've talked a few times before, but I've never really gotten your origin story and like how you got into technology. Do you mind just spending a couple minutes and just telling us, hey, this is Phil and this is why I love doing tech?
Yeah, great question. Don't get to unpack this very much, and it's been kind of a journey. So way back when I was a young teenager, really into computers and started fiddling around with open source software. So my first technological love, as it were, was a piece of forum software called PHPBB. Some of y'all might remember that. It was big when forums were a thing 20 years ago at this point. Got involved there in development, got involved there in answering tickets on their forums, really just trying to be helpful, using it as an opportunity to explore some of my own curiosity. That in turn led me to WordPress. I had a freelance client that wanted to connect their forum and their WordPress site, share authentication, share content. Thought this WordPress thing was pretty cool, fancied myself a writer at the time, like I think every angsty teenager does, started my own blog, started trying to do things with WordPress, make it do different things. That led me to a role at Automattic. So I joined as a happiness engineer at Automattic back probably 15 years ago at this point, maybe even a little bit longer now. Eventually moved into working on the WordPress VIP team as a VIP wrangler, which is sort of their name for client-facing engineers, or was at the time anyway, that just help them solve their technical problems. Spent a couple of years on the startup route, worked as an engineer at a startup in Los Angeles. About 10 years ago, I joined 10up, a digital agency that many of you might be familiar with, in what we at the time called a web strategy role, which is kind of a combination of sales, account management, really leaned into some subject matter expertise. Over time, that role evolved, ended up leading the sales team at 10up for a number of years. Back about a year and a half ago, 10up merged with a company called Fueled. So together, we are Fueled, build websites, mobile apps, digital experiences for all sorts of different clients. 7 or 8 months ago, I moved back over to the technology side of the house after wearing the sales hat for a while.
Okay.
I'm now the SVP of Technology at Fueled. Just really a nice opportunity to kind of take the intersection of those skills, talking to clients, solving problems, thinking about things through a business lens, but also leaning onto that technology expertise. So I spend a lot of my time working with our clients, working with our prospects, spend a lot of my time supporting our technology team. It's our engineering team, our open source function, and a few other things that roll up to that. Really just trying to figure out how to navigate all the changes that have happened over the last couple of years.
Sure.
A lot of us, I think, in this ecosystem, there's been a lot of evolution in WordPress, but this AI thing, I truly think is a generational shift in technology that's going to have to force everyone, engineers or not, to rethink their role, rethink how they can create some value.
Yeah.
And my job today is primarily trying to help our team navigate that both internally, figuring out what software engineering looks like for the next 1, 2, 3 decades, externally. What does that story look like for our clients? What kinds of problems can we solve now? What are the right ways to solve those problems? And recognizing that all of those answers are probably a little different today than they were maybe even a year or two ago.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay. All right. Lots to unpack here. And I want to get to the AI conversation because you had a great post on LinkedIn talking about how you're approaching this with your engineers. But before we get there, there's one curious thing that I want to kind of peel apart because, I've spent some time in support. I know a lot of people in support. And sometimes there's that dreaded feeling that you're in support and you're just going to be stuck in support forever. And from your story, obviously you made that transition from being in support to trying a bunch of different things on. And I'd love to kind of get your insights for somebody who's thinking the same way, like maybe they're in support, they're looking for other ideas. What's kind of some advice you might share with somebody who's trying to look to expand themselves into different parts of the organization?
I think one of the best things that you can possibly do, both in your career and just for finding what satisfies you personally, is stacking skills. Trying a lot of different things, learning how to do those things well. And eventually you kind of get this Venn diagram of different things put together: support, engineering, design, product thinking, some of the boring business operations stuff like finance. Once you start to put those together, you make yourself really unique and you gain a really unique perspective. Automattic, I think they still do this. They used to do it when I was there. Used to do a thing whenever they brought anybody on board where you spent a couple of weeks in what they call the happiness rotation. The idea being that everybody on the team needed to know what it was like to talk directly with their customers. I think that is one of the single most valuable pieces of experience anybody can get, whether it be at their current company or just as they start building their career and gaining skills and understanding how things work. At the end of the day, pretty much every business on the planet exists to serve its customers. And that relationship might be a little more hands-on, it might be a little more hands-off, but the company is measured, you are measured by your ability to solve those challenges for those people that the company exists to serve. And working in support gives you an empathy for that you cannot possibly get anywhere else. It is one of those things that you just have to experience. I credit, frankly, a lot of my career growth and a lot of the success that I have been able to achieve on that time that I have spent working directly hands-on with folks who are using the products that I'm invested in and caring about at that point in time. I think I have something like 15,000 forum posts on PHPBB.com still. Like my profile name is Phil. You can go Google it and fact check it if you want to. We're all years ago, but that's a lot of time. That's a lot of reps. That's a lot of thinking about how can I be empathetic? How can I explain things clearly? How can I really get to the root of the problem here? As we all know, people don't always ask the thing that they're trying to solve. They ask what they think they're trying to solve, and those two things can be very different.
Sure.
And spending that time gaining that skill set and gaining that empathy and practicing how to communicate clearly, how to break down complicated ideas, how to understand that the model that you have in your head, the assumptions that you have made, the things that you know are true, are not necessarily the same place those folks that you're talking to are coming from. And being able to break it down in a way that doesn't feel like you're demeaning or speaking down to them, but reaching them at their level is a skill that you can apply absolutely anywhere. I remember, this must have been 11 or 12 years ago, but shortly before I joined 10up, Jake, 10up's founder, reached out to me and we were kind of just chatting and catching up. And he mentioned to me that he and I worked together. He was a client of WordPress VIP, or an agency partner at the time that I worked there as a VIP wrangler.
Yeah.
That he remembered me because he always thought that I wrote very good emails. And that comes from that support experience. That comes from reaching people where they are. And that might be a different level of skill when you're talking to the president and founder of an agency like 10up versus somebody who's trying to set up a blog for the first time and only learned what this WordPress thing was a week or two ago. But those are skills that will always be valuable anywhere. So to get to your original question, where do you go with that skill set? Keep building on it. Keep learning new things. Find other things that interest you. Stack those skills. It has never been easier to learn something new. It has never been easier to start to add and build onto that skill set. There will always be a place for people who are able to communicate clearly, who are able to solve problems, that mentality that you need to have to be successful in a support role. And you can always use that as the foundation no matter what you are doing.
Excellent. Perfect answer. And honestly, the perfect segue into talking about AI, because, I think there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of fear around AI. And one of the big things that I know a lot of developers are kind of going through right now is this going to replace my job? And so I'm curious, and it reminds me of like 20 years ago, right, when offshoring was happening, especially in the US, and people were literally training someone to take their job. And so I think there's maybe like this concern right now of, hey, is a company having me use these tools so that I can eventually just work myself out of a job. So I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts about like that concern and how you're addressing it at 10up.
I think it is important to be like open and forthright on this topic in particular. For the question of will AI replace my job as a software engineer? I think the answer there is it's up to you. AI does fundamentally change the role of software engineers and the value that they can provide. Software engineering, if you kind of like peel it back and try to let go of your preconceptions of it, is actually a pretty unique role in that it is partially what I will call a very intellectual or strategic role, thinking through problems. What is the right thing to build? What is the right way to build this so that it is scalable and maintainable and performant? Coupled with a lot of very, I'll call it mechanical work, the fingers on keyboard time where you're just bashing code out. High-performing software engineers are good at both of those things. AI is very effective at, right now, creating a lot of efficiency in, and I don't think we are too far from, maybe not entirely eliminating, but substantially changing the day-to-day of engineers that spend the vast majority of their time in that hands-on keyboard time. Just taking a ticket, somebody's already defined what this needs to do, somebody's already defined how it fits into the big picture, and I am just the human machine sitting there pounding out the keystrokes to write the code to make it happen. What AI is much less effective at is that more strategic work, and this actually kind of dovetails well, as you pointed out, into that customer success, customer service conversation. It is not so good at the technical architecture yet. It will likely get better, but not quite there, especially on larger, more complicated code bases. It is not so good at taking very technical concepts and explaining them to non-technical stakeholders, whether that be a customer, whether that be your product or project manager, whether that be other internal or external folks that you're working with. It is not so good at the creative and divergent thinking. If you need to do something novel, if there's not a ton of documentation on how to do this, if you're building against an API that is very poorly documented, AI can make you more efficient there, but it is not going to be able to do all of the work for you. I think the software engineers that are best positioned to, succeed and thrive over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years as this technology continues to evolve are the ones who really embrace that more creative and strategic aspect of the role. What does it mean to be a partner to those non-technical stakeholders? What does it mean to really take ownership of the architecture, the planning, does this feel right once it is built? I'm sure we have all had experiences where we have built something exactly the way that we thought it should work, loaded it up in the browser, started playing with it, and just said to ourselves, yeah, this isn't quite right. And maybe it's a UX thing, maybe it's an under-the-hood technology thing, maybe it's a combination of both. AI will make us more efficient at that work, but I don't think it will replace that human creativity. So ultimately, the direction that I think we are going is this combination of AI empowering that human creativity so that we can spend more time on that, I'll call it the intellectual pursuit of software engineering and less time on the mechanics of just hammering out and bashing out code. That is, I think, a particular call to action for more junior engineers. And in a lot of engineering organizations, you kind of have the senior level people who spend more of their time on that architectural stuff. You have the junior engineers, might be offshore in some organizations, might just be fresh college graduates or people who have recently moved into software engineering as a career. AI will absolutely accelerate that stepping stone from I am new to programming to I can handle architectural thinking, because it can help you get through writing that code. It can help you try a lot of things very quickly, learn a lot of things very quickly. You can kind of speed run that now. But you need to continue to push yourself to grow. You need to continue to push yourself to understand some of the harder parts of software engineering, what makes something performant, what makes something secure, what makes something maintainable, what makes something not a technical debt mess. But you need to do the work. You need to put in the effort to get there. And if you don't, to be perfectly transparent, I think there is a realistic chance that the role that you hold in software engineering today might not exist in a couple of years. But if you can do that, not only will I think you will be okay, you will be somebody who can create far more impact a year or two from now, or even today, than you could have 2 or 3 years before, because AI helps you get that time to go to VS Code or pick your favorite IDE and make this happen, and make that 5% of your job instead of 90% of your job.
Okay, excellent and very insightful, I think, for this repetitive task syndrome. These anything that you can, automate, AI is going to be taking this over. It's from what I'm seeing. Kind of like switch it up a little bit, make this maybe a little bit more fun. What are some examples of tools, name a tool and name a process or a project that you've recently worked on where AI was able to fundamentally change how you approached it?
So we're exploring at Field right now what it means to push ourselves through an AI-led development process, which means taking both semi-technical stakeholders, product managers, and engineers, pairing them together, and basically asking them, how far can we get just leaning on tools like Cursor, just leaning on tools like Copilot or Windsurf, or even some of the higher fidelity tools like Lovable or V0, before we have to start cranking out this code ourselves. We are working on a project right now where we actually pitched a very similar project about 4 years ago. And we think that we can do this in about 10% of the time for about 10% of the investment that we pitched this at 3 or 4 years ago using this approach. Early signs there show that it's pretty successful. I saw, I'll call it a work in progress MVP that team is working on. They've been at this for like 3 weeks now, and it is stunning how far they have been able to get. I built something similar as a hobby project years ago, and just in my nights and weekends, it took me like a year and a half to get that far. We're talking a team of like 3 people, 2 engineers, a product manager in a couple of weeks. We've also seen a ton of success using tools like Gemini to help us with things like technical documentation. That's stuff that most people don't really like doing, but it's just part of building enterprise software, part of building complicated things. We like Gemini for the larger context window. The million tokens helps out a lot here. Again, like mind-blowing the first time you see it, how far it is able to get. We've coached it on tone, we've coached it on structure, how do we like to lay these documents out, by just dumping in the work that we are already doing, eating transcripts, example code, some very high-level architectural thinking, and just letting it go. Those are still deliverables that are going to need some human refinement, need some human adjustment, but they're 90 or 95% of the way there on version 1, and it's only going to get better.
Okay. Excellent. No, and I think that's really insightful. And, hearing that an organization like 10up is already, really diving into the deep end and trying out these tools at that level is very encouraging. And, I think maybe one way for people to change their perspective on this is rather than it eliminating your job, it's now giving you the ability to work on that much more and try projects that are that much more impressive. So very exciting stuff to hear about all there. Phil, we've gone over our time. I usually try and keep these at 15 minutes. There's so much here. There's so much to unpack here. Can I count on having you on a show in a couple of months or something and follow up with you?
Yeah, I am up for the sequel and the sequel of the sequel. Would love to keep chatting about this. And I'm sure even if I came back 2 weeks from now, we would probably find out something new that I could share.
Absolutely. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that online?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Phil Crumm. I am on most other social networks at PCRUMM, first initial, last name. Or you can shoot me an email, phil@fuel.com. Always love chatting with folks. Always love learning about what you're working on. Always happy to help out if I can, whether it be, I'm in customer success and I want to switch careers, really trying to figure out how to navigate this AI thing, set client expectation. We're all figuring this out together. There is no playbook for most of this now. And I think the more that we put our heads together, the closer we can get to an answer that maybe it isn't right, but it's at least in the right direction, and we can continue to grow and learn from each other.
Excellent. Awesome. Phil, it's great talking with you. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Roger.